What happens when a billionaire used to solving every problem with power and money comes face to face with something even he can't control? And what if the only hope for his silent, non-verbal daughter doesn't come from world-renowned specialists, but from 3 homeless children with nothing but heart, instinct, and a homemade picture book? This is the story of Ethan Wells, a tech magnate who's built empires from scratch, but is powerless in the face of his daughter's silence, and Amelia, his once bright, joyful little girl, now stares blankly into space, unresponsive to every voice but one, or rather, 3. Who are these mysterious children that connect with her in a way no one else could? Why did Ethan push them away the first time they met, and will he have the courage to seek their help again? What secrets from the past tie these families together in ways none of them could have imagined? This is not just a story about recovery. It's about breaking cycles. It's about choosing love over pride, connection over control, and redefining what family truly means. If stories like this move you about second chances, unexpected heroes, and the healing power of connection, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's begin. In the grand mansion nestled in Greenwood Heights, Ethan Wells stood motionless before the large window, his cold gaze fixed on the silhouette of the neurologist who had just left his daughter's room, his face full of disappointment. Behind him, the skyline of Halstead City shimmered with evening lights, a stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere weighing on the father's mind. Mr. Wells. The doctor's voice was gentle but couldn't conceal its seriousness. We still haven't been able to identify the cause of Amelia's regression. Ethan's fingers clenched the medical report so tightly that the expensive paper was now creased and wrinkled. Amelia, his 7-year-old daughter, whom he had always called his little angel, had not responded to any stimuli for 3 weeks. No eye contact, no sound, no gestures, only wide, vacant eyes that once held a quiet intelligence. "That is unacceptable," Ethan said, his voice low and calm, in stark contrast to the fury churning within him. At 48, he was the founder and CEO of a globally influential tech corporation. To him, every problem could be solved by money or by power. "I've brought in top specialists from all over the world. There must be an explanation." The neurologist looked uncomfortable. "Sir, Amelia's condition was already complex from the beginning. This recent regression makes everything even more unpredictable. With rare neurological disorders, I'm not paying you to say unpredictable." Ethan cut in coldly. "I need results." After the doctor left, Ethan walked into his daughter's room. It resembled a miniature intensive care unit, medical equipment humming softly, monitors emitting gentle beeps, and nurses taking shifts to watch over her around the clock. At the center of the room, Amelia sat propped up against carefully arranged pillows. Her golden hair was neatly combed, and she wore her favorite blue dress. Her eyes remained fixed on some undefined distance. "Sweetheart," Ethan whispered, taking her small hand, "Daddy's here." No reaction, no sign of recognition, nothing but painful silence. His mind drifted back to an afternoon 2 weeks ago at Meadow Square Park, when he had quietly observed his daughter from afar, a routine he often repeated. In moments like that, he always hoped to see some tiny sign of progress, of hope. That day, Amelia had been sitting beside her nanny on a stone bench, while the woman was engrossed in her phone. That's when he noticed 3 unfamiliar boys approaching, The eldest, who looked to be around 9, was skinny but had a resolute gaze like someone far beyond his years. The second wore a worn-out backpack, and the youngest, about 5, clutched a torn toy tightly in his arms. Ethan initially felt a surge of worry, his feet poised to rush over. But then, something miraculous happened. The eldest boy began making silly faces, and Amelia, as if awakened by some unseen magic, gently smiled. The second boy took handmade cards from his backpack, each bearing simple drawings and short words: happy, sad, hello. And the youngest boy gently held Amelia's hand and began making soft, simple sounds, a private language, as if meant just for her. In that moment, Amelia opened her mouth, trying to mimic the sounds, a sign, a miracle. But what did he do? He charged forward, shoved the boys away, fired the nanny on the spot, and pulled his daughter away, cutting off the only glimmer of hope she had shown in months. An older woman, seemingly the boy's grandmother, came running to explain. But Ethan, wrapped in his armored pride, merely gave her a look of disdain and turned away. Now, in a room filled only with the echo of machines, Ethan Wells stood there, the father who once believed he could buy anything, faced with a truth that made him tremble. In trying to protect his daughter, he may have unknowingly taken away her one and only chance to return to the world. "I'm sorry, Amelia," he whispered, a tear sliding from the corner of his eye. "I made a terrible mistake." Little Amelia sat on the stone bench in Meadow Square Park, her eyes fixed on the still surface of the lake. Beside her, the nanny Monica was absorbed in her phone, completely oblivious to the little girl she was generously paid to care for. Hidden behind an old oak tree, Ethan Wells watched from a distance, as he often did. In these moments, when no one was paying attention, he hoped to catch a glimpse of something, a reaction, a movement, a glance, any signal that Amelia was still present in this world. But that afternoon was unlike the others. 3 unfamiliar boys appeared in the distance, walking toward the bench where his daughter sat. The eldest looked to be around 9 years old, tall and lanky, but with a resolute gaze like someone used to protecting others. The second boy was a few years younger, carrying a worn backpack with a visible patch. The youngest was tiny, and clothes far too big for him, his hair messy like a bird's nest. Ethan was instantly on guard. He nearly stepped out from his hiding spot, but then froze when something unexpected happened. The eldest boy, whose name he would later learn was Noah, began making funny faces, pouting lips, bulging eyes, puffed cheeks, and then the unthinkable happened. Amelia's lips trembled slightly, then curled into a faint smile. The boy with the backpack, Elijah, sat down in front of her and carefully took out a series of handmade cards from his bag. Each card had a simple drawing and a word: happy, sad. "Hello. I made these for my sister," Elijah said softly, his voice full of pride. She used to not be able to speak. The youngest boy, Micah, approached cautiously, as if nearing a fragile baby bird. He gently took Amelia's hand in his tiny fingers and began to make soft, melodic sounds, a distinct kind of language, seemingly understood only by children. "Like this," he whispered, and as if by magic, Amelia opened her mouth, trying to imitate the sound he had just made. The sight froze Ethan in place. Something broke open inside him, not from fear, but from hope. But almost instantly, his rigid logic and ingrained pride took over. He rushed forward. "Get away from her," he barked, shoving Noah aside. "Monica, you're fired. Pack your things." He grabbed Amelia's arm, intending to pull her away, when an older woman appeared from behind, her face flushed with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked sternly. "Those are my grandsons. Your grandsons should be in school, not bothering vulnerable children." Ethan snapped coldly. "Keep them away from my daughter." The elderly woman, Ruth, did not back down. They were just being kind. "Something you might want to learn. I don't need parenting advice from someone who raised strays," he replied, voice dripping with disdain. "Come on, Amelia." He pulled his daughter away, never once noticing the sorrowful look she cast back as if she were losing something precious. For the first time in months, Amelia had shown a reaction, a connection, and he had severed it. Ruth said nothing as she watched them go, her gaze sad but unyielding. "Let's go, boys," she said quietly. "Not everyone can see what lies beneath the surface." Noah held his brother's hands and whispered to her. "But she was happy with us. Grandma." "I know, sweetheart," Ruth replied softly. "I know." The days that followed were filled with torment for Ethan. Each morning, he would enter his daughter's room with a forced smile, trying to convey hope. But her gaze remained empty, her meals untouched, and the world inside Amelia drifted further and further away. "Mr. Wells," said Dr. Helena Brooks, one of the top neurologists, cautiously after an examination. "Has anything unusual occurred recently in the girl's routine?" Any event that could have been emotionally jarring, Ethan waved her off. Nothing of note, just the usual therapy sessions. He didn't mention the incident at the park, not because he forgot, but because he was ashamed. Deep down, perhaps he already knew that Amelia had responded to those 3 boys in a way no amount of expensive specialists ever had. "I'll increase the therapy schedule," he said, pulling out his phone. "I've also just ordered a new neurofeedback device from Switzerland. It'll arrive by Wednesday." Dr. Brooks sighed. "More isn't always better, Mr. Wells. What she needs is emotional connection, not just clinical intervention." "With all due respect," he replied, "I believe in solutions concrete, tangible ones, not vague theories." His voice made it clear that no further discussion would be entertained. After Dr. Helena Brooks left the mansion, Ethan Wells returned to his study, a space overflowing with medical documents, in-depth research, and electronic devices designed to aid in neurological data analysis. He practically locked himself inside. Lengthy international calls stretched on for hours, from research institutes in Sweden to pioneering clinics in Japan, all carrying the same plea: "I need a solution, for my daughter cost is not a concern." The executives of Wells Tech Corporation were instructed to run the company without him for the foreseeable future. Ethan's full attention and resources were now focused on one thing alone: Amelia. From outside the office door, Gregory, the loyal chauffeur who had served the family for over 20 years, watched with heavy concern in his eyes. He had witnessed Ethan grow from an ambitious young man into a cold, unyielding businessman. But beneath that hardened shell, Gregory could now see a desperate father, a man who had everything, except the means to save his daughter. Late that night, Gregory brought hot coffee to the study as he always did. He found Ethan sitting motionless at his desk, eyes vacant and staring into space, surrounded by a clutter of medical files. "Nothing works," Ethan whispered, more to himself than to Gregory. I've hired the greatest minds in the world, spent millions. Why can't any of it help her? Gregory quietly placed the coffee on the desk. Then, hesitantly, he spoke. Perhaps, sir, some things don't need to be fixed. They just need to be understood. Ethan immediately looked up, his gaze sharp. What do you mean? Maybe the girl needs something different than what modern medicine is offering. For a brief moment, the mask of logic Ethan always wore seemed to crack. His voice broke, almost a whisper. What if I lose her? Gregory. What if she never comes back? Gregory nodded slowly, as if he had been waiting for that question for a long time. Sometimes the answer comes from where we least expect it. No more words were exchanged. But both men understood what remained unspoken, that even with all the power and wealth in the world, Ethan Wells was utterly powerless against the simplest of all desires to bring his daughter back to life. The next morning, Gregory stood outside the study door, hand raised to knock, then hesitated. After 2 decades of service, he knew his place and that offering personal advice to his employer was almost unthinkable. But the image of Amelia frail, silent, her eyes vacant, pushed him forward. 3 gentle knocks. Come in. Ethan's tired voice replied from within. Gregory entered. Nothing in the room had changed the soft yellow light. The desk buried in papers, and a man who had long abandoned his usual composure. The once impeccable, expensive suit was now wrinkled, dark circles heavy under his eyes. I brought dinner, sir, Gregory said, placing the tray down. He paused, then summoned his courage. May I say something? Ethan frowned. What is it? It's about Amelia, sir. Gregory took a breath. I keep thinking about what happened in the park. Ethan immediately tensed. What about it? Those 3 children. I've never seen the girl respond to anyone like that. Maybe they can help. Ethan laughed, a dry, bitter sound. You're suggesting I bring stray children into my home. They're not strays, sir, at least not entirely. The youngest. There's something special about the way he connected with Amelia. Enough, Ethan snapped, slamming the desk. I've hired the best experts in the world. I don't need parenting advice from my chauffeur about letting street kids near my daughter. Gregory stepped back, his voice subdued. I understand. I'm sorry for overstepping. He left the room in silence. Ethan lowered his head, his hands covering his face. The suggestion, it was absurd, almost insane, and yet, that night, he sat quietly beside Amelia's bed, holding her hand as if trying to transfer his warmth to her. My love, please, he whispered, come back to me. No sound, no movement, nothing but silence. And then the image from the park returned when she had opened her mouth, trying to mimic the youngest boy's sounds, a fleeting moment of connection, brief but real. They had done what modern medicine could not. And now, in the midst of darkness and despair, Ethan Wells was forced to confront the final question. Do fame, status, and pride matter more than the fading life of his only daughter as dawn crept through the window? He was still there, silent, sleepless, but in his eyes there was no longer despair. Only a resolve unlike anything he had ever known. That morning, Ethan Wells was still sitting silently beside Amelia's bed, dark circles under his eyes from staying up all night. He had made the most difficult decision of his life. No more plans, no more strategies, only a father clinging to his last hope. When Gregory brought breakfast as usual, Ethan didn't look up. He only spoke quietly, his voice breaking as if each word shattered. "Find them." Gregory froze. "Sir, the 3 boys in the park and their grandmother. Find them, at any cost." Only then did Ethan turn his head. His eyes were bloodshot, but in them was an unwavering resolve. No matter the expense, no matter what it takes, bring them here. Gregory looked at his employer for a long moment, and for the first time in many years, he felt something akin to hope. He nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. I'll leave right away." As Gregory left the room, Ethan turned back to his daughter, still motionless, silent, as if the world had permanently retreated from her. "I just hope this isn't another mistake," he whispered, placing a kiss on Amelia's hand. "For you, I'll do everything. Over the next 3 days." Gregory scoured Halstead City for any trace of the 3 boys and their grandmother. He started at Meadow Square Park, asking every street vendor, every security guard, every morning jogger. No one remembered clearly. Some thought they might have seen the children, but then shook their heads. He expanded the search into nearby neighborhoods, knocking on doors at community centers, shelters, churches, even soup kitchens in the South Gate district. At every stop, he showed a photo of Amelia and described the boys who had approached her in the park. Most leads went nowhere. By the 3rd day, exhausted and nearly defeated, Gregory stepped into a small community center tucked behind a run-down apartment complex. Though the walls were peeling, the inside was warm, filled with children's drawings and the gentle scent of food from the kitchen. "I'm looking for an elderly woman," Gregory said to the coordinator. "She has 3 grandsons, one about 9 years old, one around 7, and a little one, about 5. The coordinator eyed him suspiciously. "Why are you looking for them?" "My employer's daughter? She's in critical condition," Gregory answered gently. "We believe these boys may be able to help her. They once connected with her in the most extraordinary way. Is your employer Ethan Wells?" the person asked, their tone stiffening. Gregory nodded. The coordinator folded their arms. "I heard what happened at the park. Mrs. Ruth told me. He humiliated those kids in front of everyone, and now he wants them back to help." "Please," Gregory said sincerely. "The girl, she's fading more each day. No one else can reach her. He doesn't know what to do anymore. As a father, he's desperate." A voice came from behind. "So now the mighty Mr. Wells needs us." Gregory turned and met the sharp gaze of an older woman, her face marked by time but full of presence and dignity. "Mrs. Ruth," he breathed. "I recognize you from the park. He sent you to find me and my grandsons?" she asked, arms crossed over her chest. "Yes. He's changed. He's not doing this for himself. It's for his daughter." A small head peeked out from behind Mrs. Ruth's skirt. It was Noah, the eldest boy. He looked straight at Gregory, his tone unusually serious. "The girl who couldn't talk. Is she sick?" "Yes," Gregory replied, "and it's gotten much worse since that day." Noah turned to his grandmother. "We should help her. I can teach her like I taught Micah." Ruth looked at her grandson, her eyes softening. She turned back to Gregory, her voice lower. "He treated us like trash," she said, "but without the previous anger. I know." Gregory nodded. "And I don't excuse him, but I've been at his side for over 20 years. I know this, he loves his daughter more than anything in this world. Right now, he's a broken father. Nothing more." Ruth looked at him, her aged eyes glinting with thought. Finally, she gave a gentle nod. "Boys," she called. The two other boys emerged, Elijah with his familiar backpack, and Micah, the youngest, clutching a worn teddy bear. "We're going to visit the little girl from the park," she said. "She's not feeling well." Noah nodded, his voice clear. "I'll bring my special sound notebook." As Gregory escorted them to the car, Mrs. Ruth gently touched his hand, her voice firm. "I'm doing this for the girl, not for him." "I understand," Gregory replied, opening the door, and so does he. The arrival of Mrs. Ruth and the three boys at the Wells estate changed the entire atmosphere of the once cold mansion. Ethan stood in the grand hall, his back straight, his expression unsure as he saw Gregory lead the guests inside. The contrast was striking. The opulence of the estate clashed starkly with the simple clothes and sun-worn faces of Ruth and the boys. "Mrs. Ruth." Ethan spoke, his tone formal, not daring to meet her gaze. "Thank you for coming." Ethan Wells couldn't bring himself to look directly at Mrs. Ruth as he greeted her. "Thank you for coming," he said softly, his voice heavy with remorse. Ruth responded in a steady tone, not warm, but not entirely cold either. "We came for the girl, Mr. Wells, not for you." The three boys took in the grandeur of the mansion with different reactions. Noah, his eyes filled with curiosity, slowed down to admire the expensive paintings on the walls. Elijah clutched his worn backpack tightly to his chest, as if to hold on to a piece of the familiar world. And Micah, as always, held tightly to his grandmother's hand, his round eyes following every luxurious detail as if he were stepping into a dream. "Please, upstairs," Ethan said, his voice trembling slightly as he turned to lead them. The hallway leading to Amelia's room seemed endless. At the door, Ethan paused, his hand resting on the knob, silent for a moment as though gathering himself. "She hasn't responded in weeks," he said slowly. "I don't want the boys to be disappointed if—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Ruth glanced at him, her gaze softening slightly. In that moment, she no longer saw the cold man who had once driven her grandsons away in the park. She saw a father worried, nearly afraid, inside the room. Amelia lay propped up by pillows, her head turned toward the window. A nurse was gently trying to coax her into eating, but the spoon remained untouched in the girl's hand, the meal uneaten. "Amelia," Ethan called gently, "you have visitors." The girl didn't move. The nurse sighed, set the tray down, and quietly stepped back. Noah was the first to walk forward, completely unfazed by the surrounding medical equipment. "Hey again," he said cheerfully. "Remember us, Amelia didn't react." Elijah quickly opened his backpack and pulled out the handmade cards, spreading them across the bed, a smiling face, a cat, the word hello scribbled in childish handwriting. "I brought these," he explained. "This one means happy." Still, Amelia lay motionless. Then Micah stepped forward without prompting or encouragement. The tiny boy simply walked over and took Amelia's still hand into his own. "Hi," he whispered, his voice soft but clear. "I'm Micah." A silence fell over the room. Ethan was about to speak, perhaps to suggest they return another time, when the miracle happened. Amelia's head turned slightly. She looked away from the window, slowly shifting her gaze toward Micah. Noah stepped up at once, beginning to sound out simple phonetic noises, almost like singing in a private language. "Ah, eh, oh." He exaggerated his mouth movements, just as he had done when teaching his younger brother. Everyone in the room held their breath as Amelia followed the movement of his lips. Micah carefully brought the spoon to her mouth. No one expected it. Amelia opened her mouth and swallowed. "Try one more time." "Okay," Noah encouraged, forming another simple sound. Amelia's lips trembled, then released a faint but distinct syllable, "ta." A first effort, a clear sign. Ethan was stunned, gripping the door frame to keep from collapsing. The nurse stood frozen. Ruth gave a subtle, satisfied nod, her eyes lighting up in the silence. "She likes us," Micah said lightly, still holding Amelia's hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ethan didn't know how to react. In just a few short minutes, these 3 children without degrees, without machines, without modern tools had reached a place inside his daughter that countless experts had failed to touch. For the first time in months, there was life in his daughter's eyes. For the first time after so many mistakes, Ethan Wells admitted to himself he had been completely wrong. And perhaps there was still much he needed to learn. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the mansion transformed completely. Ethan invited Mrs., Ruth, and the boys to return daily. He arranged for transportation, even offered generous compensation. "I don't take money," Ruth said firmly, "but I also won't deny the children the chance to help that little girl." A new routine quickly formed. Amelia's once rigid schedule of medical therapies was replaced by sessions of play, or rather, interaction with Noah, Elijah, and Micah. The sterile, hospital-like room gradually warmed with the sounds of children laughing, whispering, the rustling of paper, and, most miraculously, the new sounds coming from Amelia. Noah, with his special intuition for nonverbal children, developed a unique system for Amelia combining simple sounds, hand gestures, and facial expressions. His approach was instinctive, but remarkably effective. You have to feel the sounds. Noah explained to a speech therapist who had come to observe, "Like I used to teach Micah, you have to feel the sounds." Noah explained to the puzzled speech therapist sitting in the back, "That's how I used to teach Micah when he couldn't speak." The therapist could only nod, her mouth slightly open in astonishment at the boy's confidence in the obvious effectiveness of his method. Meanwhile, Elijah, methodical and organized by nature, was carefully laying out tools he had created himself, a communication board with pictures, sensory puzzle pieces, simple games made from recycled kitchen materials. Each one was designed specifically for Amelia to stimulate her senses, encourage interaction, and awaken nonverbal language. "Look, Mr. Wells," Elijah said, holding up a hand-drawn board. "This has pictures of everything in her room. She can point to what she wants." Ethan Wells watched intently, surprised by the boy's creativity. For the first time in his life, he picked up a pen instinctively, taking notes and listening to a child as if he were attending a professional seminar. But it was Micah, the youngest, who formed the deepest bond with Amelia. The 2 children would sit together for hours, hand in hand, exchanging what seemed like simple glances but carried an entire world of their own language. They have their own way of communicating. "Mrs.," Ruth said, standing by the window observing. "Sometimes words only complicate things." At first, Ethan stood on the sidelines. He kept his distance, as if afraid that stepping in would shatter the magic happening before him. But gradually, admiration and gratitude pulled him closer. He began learning to pronounce simple sounds alongside Noah, joined in Elijah's games, and spent hours with Micah just listening, feeling, and being present. The Wells estate seemed to awaken from a long slumber. Doors, once closed in grief, were thrown open to the breeze. Rooms that had felt like a museum now echoed with children's laughter. The kitchen prepared cookies, fruit, and drinks for the afternoon sessions. The staff, once accustomed to solemn silence, now heard the patter of playful footsteps, soft chatter, the rustle of paper from drawing boards. Within this new rhythm, Mrs. Ruth moved like a quiet guide, not boastful, never overbearing but respected by all. Even Ethan found himself feeling a growing reverence for the woman he had once dismissed. One afternoon, as Ruth was preparing to take the children back to the car, Ethan approached, hesitating before speaking. "They're special children. You've raised them incredibly well, especially under difficult circumstances." Ruth looked him in the eye, her voice calm but firm. "Children don't need wealth to grow up well. They need love, clear boundaries, and someone who truly believes in them." Ethan nodded, his voice quieter. "I've poured millions into therapies, but nothing has worked like what your boys are doing. He paused, swallowing something he'd never said to anyone before. "I'm grateful." Ruth's expression softened slightly. "Don't thank me just yet. The road ahead is still long." As the car slowly pulled away from the mansion gates, Ethan stood watching, hands in his pockets, afraid that if he went back inside, the miracle would disappear. For the first time in a long while, something warm stirred in his chest, a feeling he thought had vanished with Amelia's initial diagnosis, hope. Nearly 3 weeks after everything began to change, Ethan invited Mrs. Ruth to dinner in the small west dining room of the mansion. The children were playing with Amelia in the sunroom, their laughter echoing down the hallway, lightening the atmosphere of the meal. Ethan poured the wine, swirling his glass, his eyes quietly studying the woman across from him. There was something oddly familiar about her. The upright posture, the way she set her utensils, the calm, observant gaze, non-judgmental, but knowing. "You seem familiar," he blurted. "Did we meet before the park?" Ruth set her fork down, lifting her head, her voice soft but steady. "I was wondering when you'd ask." "So it's true," she nodded. "Not exactly met, but I was once very close to your family." "What do you mean?" Ethan frowned. "I used to work for your mother, Eleanor Wells, for over 20 years. I was the head housekeeper at the Wells estate in Hawthorne." Ethan nearly dropped his wine glass. "You worked for my mother. In what capacity? I managed all the household staff from 1975 to 1995. His head reeled. 1995. I was in college then. But why did you leave?" Ruth looked down, folding her napkin slowly as if bracing herself for the story she was about to tell. "I was dismissed without even a letter of reference." "Mrs." Ruth said, her voice steady but clearly battling old memories. What was the reason? Ethan Wells asked, tension in his tone. "Your mother," she replied slowly, "found out that your brother, Alex, was spending time regularly with my son, Edward. Though they were just children, she couldn't accept that closeness. In her eyes, a wealthy boy could never befriend the son of the help." Ruth's gaze softened, but still carried a trace of unhealed sorrow. "We were thrown out that very day." Ethan leaned back in his chair, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Alex never told me any of this. I imagine he didn't." Ruth said. "Your mother made it very clear that friendship wasn't allowed to exist." A dreadful thought crossed Ethan's mind, and he murmured, "Alexander. Was he the father of—" "No." Ruth cut him off, firmly. "Edward, my son, is their father. How is he now?" Ethan asked, heart pounding, afraid of the answer. Edward never recovered from the shock of being cast out of what he once called home, Ruth said, her eyes fixed on the candlelight. He grew up angry, without direction, married young, then abandoned Noah's mother when she was pregnant, did the same to Elijah's and Micah's mothers. He came and went like a ghost, a father on paper, but never truly present. Ethan sat in silence. He felt as if he'd been slapped awake by a bitter truth. "And their mother?" he asked softly. "Her name was Hannah," Ruth replied. "A strong woman, but met with too much injustice. She left the boys with me when she moved to Brookline to look for work. I've raised all three since Micah was in diapers." Ethan felt a chill down his spine. Every word Ruth spoke was like a mirror reflecting the consequences of the generation before, of his mother, of himself, and of the way of life he once believed was right. "I almost repeated the same mistake," he said, his eyes welling up. "At the park, when I chased them off, I acted no differently than my mother." Ruth looked at him, not with anger now, but with honest clarity. "Yes, you were like her." Ethan rose from his seat and walked to the window. Snow had begun to fall softly on the quiet garden of the estate. "I remember now," he said, his voice deep and distant. "Edward tall, always laughing, full of energy. Alex adored him. They were like brothers, until they were torn apart," Ruth said, her eyes far away, "not by their own doing." Ethan turned back, his voice breaking. "I can't undo what my family did to you and your grandchildren." "No," she said, "but you can choose, keep repeating the same mistakes, or break the cycle." Ethan looked up toward the staircase, where Amelia was playing with Micah. He thought of the look in his daughter's eyes the first time she saw the three boys again, a brightness he hadn't seen in years. He thought of Alex, his late brother, who died 5 years ago, never having reconciled with his childhood best friend. "I have to break it," he said, this time with unwavering resolve, "for Amelia and for those boys." From the hallway, the sound of children's laughter rang out, a pure sound that had been absent from the estate for far too long. A sound that pierced through the towering walls of tradition that once ruled this place. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He went to his study and opened the old photo albums for the first time in years. There was dust, signs of time, and memories he thought he had forgotten. And then he found a photo from a summer picnic in 1988, Alex, still a teenager, beaming beside a tall, skinny boy with Ruth's same sharp gaze. Edward? Sleep never came that night. Only questions, repeated over and over. If his mother hadn't interfered, would Edward have turned out differently? Would he? Alex, Hannah, and those three boys have lived different lives when the sun rose? Ethan Wells left his study a changed man, not with a grand declaration, but with the smallest of actions. He began attending Amelia's morning sessions, not just to observe, but to join in. He asked Ruth how she organized activities, how she connected the boys through play and feeling. "You have to sit down with them," she said, pointing to the rug where Amelia and Micah were building a paper castle. "Children don't communicate like adults. They speak through hugs, through eyes, through real presence. Ethan took off his shoes, lowered himself to the floor, and sat cross-legged beside his daughter, a 48-year-old tech mogul now babbling nonsense sounds, drawing smiley faces on paper with Noah and Elijah. At first, he felt foolish, but then Amelia turned to him, truly looked at him. "That's it, Mr. Wells." Noah cheered. "She's connecting with you now." And just like that, he didn't feel ridiculous anymore. He felt happy. Noah's encouragement brought something no one expected. When Amelia looked directly at her father, a clear, conscious gaze, the embarrassment and hesitation within Ethan Wells melted away. "That's it, Mr. Wells," Noah exclaimed. "She's connecting with you." In that moment, everything that had once consumed Ethan's mind, the tech empire he had spent his life building, suddenly faded. The meetings, international projects, massive deals. None of it mattered more than his daughter's gaze. He began delegating most of his work, canceling non-essential meetings, and arranging his schedule so that he could be home every afternoon to join the interaction sessions with Amelia and the three boys. The leadership team at Wells Tech was completely stunned by the sudden change. The man, once known for his 60-hour work weeks and rigid leadership style, was now leaving the office at 3 p.m., frequently mentioning concepts like emotional intelligence and genuine connection. During one meeting, the company's CFO cautiously brought up a point regarding the deal with Singapore. "Sir, what's the issue?" Ethan asked, glancing at his watch. "They're pressing for a contract. We could push for a better price, offer a fair deal." Ethan interrupted. "I want partners, not victims, and I need to be home by 3. It wasn't just his working style that changed. His behavior toward those around him shifted too. He began calling each household staff member by name, asking about their families, noticing and appreciating their efforts. Gregory, the loyal driver, was stunned when Ethan invited him to join the family for dinner one evening. "You were right, Gregory," Ethan admitted during the meal, his voice quiet but sincere. "The answer came from where I least expected. But the greatest change was in how Ethan saw his daughter. The medical equipment that once filled a corner of the room was moved to a storage closet. The packed therapy schedule was replaced by free playtime, rest, and authentic moments of connection with Noah, Elijah, and Micah. At a follow-up appointment, Dr. Helena Brooks noticed the difference and gave a gentle nod. "Now you're truly seeing your daughter," she said softly, "not just her symptoms. I kept trying to fix her," Ethan confessed, "but Amelia doesn't need fixing. She needs to be understood, day by day." Amelia responded more clearly to the communication system Noah had developed. Her speech improved, her expressions became more fluid, and with every step forward, Ethan began to question everything he had once believed that money, power, or status could heal anything. One evening, as Ethan watched Amelia and Micah draw together under the soft light, Ruth approached and stood beside him. "You've changed," she said, simple, but deeply perceptive. "I'm trying," Ethan replied. "I've lived my whole life becoming the man my mother wanted, cold, efficient, successful. I never questioned it, not until now. It's never too late to change course," Ruth said gently. "Look at Amelia. A month ago, she didn't respond to the world. Now she's sitting there, drawing with Micah, learning sounds from Noah. Thanks to your family," Ethan acknowledged. "People my mother would never have let through the front gate." Ruth thought for a moment. Perhaps the greatest lesson in all of this is the barriers we build around status. Money, education, they don't protect us. They only isolate us. Outside the window, thick snow covered the carefully trimmed garden. The expensive flower beds and overgrown weeds now lay under the same cold white layer. Nothing distinguished rich from poor anymore. Inside, the laughter of children, whether Amelia, Noah, Elijah, or Micah, echoed through the halls, shattering the silence that once blanketed the Wells estate. The man who had spent his life building walls around himself was now, brick by brick, tearing them down. On a quiet winter morning, the peaceful rhythm of the estate was abruptly broken when Gregory burst into the study, visibly uneasy. "Sir, there's something at the front gate." Ethan looked up. A woman. She claims to be the mother of the 3 boys. She wants to see them immediately. His heart sank. Hannah. In the grand foyer, Ruth stood beside a young woman's slender frame, direct and resolute eyes. Though simply dressed, she carried a dignity that couldn't be hidden. "Where are my children?" she demanded as soon as she saw Ethan step forward. "They're upstairs. With my daughter." Ethan turned to Ruth. "Perhaps you should—" "I'm staying," Ruth said firmly. "Hannah, please remain calm." "Calm down," Hannah's voice broke. "My 3 children have been coming and going from a stranger's mansion for weeks, and I didn't know a thing. I only found out because of a neighbor in Brookline." Ethan Wells stepped forward, trying to keep his voice composed. "Ma'am, Ms. Parker." Hannah cut in, her eyes sharp as blades. "I was never married." "Ms. Parker," Ethan corrected himself, his tone sincere. "I understand your concern. Your boys have helped my daughter Amelia, who suffers from a rare neurological condition. Because of them, she's made incredible progress." Hannah's expression did not soften. "They could have taught her to fly, and it still wouldn't change the fact that I was never asked," she said, eyes burning with both anger and pain. Before Ethan could respond, hurried footsteps echoed from the staircase. "Mom!" Noah shouted, running straight into her arms. Elijah and Micah followed close behind. Faces lit up like sunlight after a long storm. The emotional reunion eased some of the tension in the air. Hannah held her children tightly, her eyes quickly scanning each one to ensure they were all right. "We helped the little girl who couldn't talk." Micah beamed, his eyes sparkling. "Now she can say my name." Hannah looked at her children, then turned to Ethan, her face conflicted. "That's good, my loves. But now it's time to go. I've got a new place in Brookline and a stable job. I came to bring you home this time, for good." 3 small faces instantly dropped. "But Mom," Noah pleaded, "Amelia needs us. She's getting better." The air grew thick again. Ruth clutched the stair railing. Ethan felt the cold rise through his chest. The boys drooped like flowers snapped from their stems. From upstairs came a high-pitched cry, wordless, but filled with pain. Amelia had sensed the collapse of the fragile world she had just begun to reclaim. "She knows something's wrong," Elijah whispered, eyes worriedly glancing up. Ethan stood there, heart aching, then made a decision that the man he had been just weeks ago would never have made. No pressure, no control, just truth. "Ms. Parker," he said, "your sons have become an essential part of my daughter's recovery. I can't deny that, but I also understand they are your children." He paused, taking a deep breath. Would you be open to discussing a compromise? Hannah folded her arms, eyes full of skepticism. What kind of compromise? My company has offices in Brookline, Ethan explained. We're always in need of capable, responsible people. I'd like to offer you a job so you can stay close to your children and still allow them to support Amelia. Hannah froze. She couldn't hide the internal conflict between her instinct to protect her children from the man who once threw them out and the very real opportunity being offered. I don't take charity, she said bluntly. And I'm not offering charity, Ethan replied, firm but calm. Your sons have a gift no amount of money can buy. They've done what entire teams of specialists couldn't. I'm proposing a fair exchange. Your commitment in return for the precious presence of your children. Ruth gently placed a hand on Hannah's arm, her eyes full of understanding. Hear him out. Dear, think of Amelia and your boys. Amelia's cries from upstairs grew louder. While the adults hesitated, Micah pulled free from his mother's grasp and started up the stairs with quiet determination. I have to go to her, he said as his mother called out. She needs me. Watching her youngest son so small, yet already placing his heart above his own needs, Hannah's resolve began to melt. All right, she breathed. We'll talk, but I'm not promising anything. As they stepped together into the living room, Ethan caught a glimpse of Micah leading Amelia down the stairs. The little girl trembled slightly, her eyes still glistening with tears. But her small hand clung tightly to Micah's, as if the entire world were held together in that one grip, defying prejudice, wealth, and the tangled pasts their families carried. Just 3 weeks after Joy had finally returned to the Wells home, Ethan's world was once again thrown into upheaval. His phone buzzed. A crisp British voice rang through the speaker. Ethan, it's me, Miranda. I'm at Logan Airport. His body went still. Miranda Wells, the ex-wife who had left him and Amelia 5 years ago, was now coming back, after leaving England. Miranda Wells had all but vanished from the lives of Ethan and Amelia, keeping in touch only at the most minimal, formal level. But now, she was standing at Logan Airport, her voice still as sharp as ever. Miranda. Ethan gripped the phone tightly, trying to stay calm. Why are you here, Doctor? Helena called me, she answered bluntly. She said our daughter has made extraordinary progress. I need to see it for myself. Ethan's gaze drifted toward the sunroom, where Amelia was drawing with Noah, Elijah, and Micah. Hannah, who had accepted a community coordinator position at Wells Tech's Brookline branch, was gently adjusting Amelia's posture. The little family had moved into the guest house on the estate grounds 2 weeks earlier, a decision that had brought stability to everyone involved. Things are very different now, Ethan warned. I figured as much. Miranda replied, Will you be sending someone to pick me up? Or should I get a cab? When Miranda stepped into the Wells estate. An old, familiar energy filled the space. At 45, she still carried an air of grace, tall, slender, with golden hair identical to Amelia's and refined features that were hard to forget. She walked through the foyer with the same confidence as if she had never left. You've changed a lot, she observed, glancing at the children's drawings hanging beside expensive art pieces. I have, Ethan replied softly, with no need to explain further. The reunion was awkward. Every word seemed to pass through a thick pain of unspoken emotion, resentment, regret, unanswered questions. But when Miranda saw Amelia in the sunroom giggling as Noah made goofy faces, the calm facade cracked. Oh my God, she whispered, barely believing her eyes. "She's actually engaging." Ethan stood beside her, unsure whether to feel proud or hurt by her astonishment, the same woman who had left them 5 years ago before things had truly begun. Those boys, Noah, Elijah, and Micah, did what no professional could, he said quietly. They found a way to reach her. Miranda stepped into the sunroom and knelt beside the children. "Hi, Amelia," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Do you remember me? It's Mommy." The room fell silent. The boys stopped what they were doing and looked on. Hannah gently took Micah's hand, eyes cautious, from the doorway. Ruth watched silently, taking in every detail. Amelia stared at Miranda for a long time, her face expressionless. Then, with deliberate slowness, she reached for the communication board Elijah had made. She selected the image of a woman, then a house, then a question mark. "She's asking if her mom is staying." Elijah translated gently. A simple question, carrying the weight of 5 years apart. Miranda bit her lip, eyes brimming. I don't know, sweetheart," she admitted, "but I'd like to try staying for a while." That evening, after the Parker family returned to the guest house, Ethan and Miranda sat across from each other in the dining room, the place that had once been a family hub, now a space reopening old questions. "Why did you leave?" Ethan finally asked the question he had buried for 5 years. Miranda set her fork down and looked him in the eyes. "Because I couldn't bear who we were becoming. You were obsessed with fixing Amelia, doctor after doctor, device after device, one program after another, and I—" She paused, choking up. "I was weak. I was afraid of watching our daughter struggle for life. I told myself at least she had you, someone who could move heaven and earth for her. I did try," Ethan said quietly, "and I failed completely, until 3 homeless kids showed me what our daughter truly needed." Miranda studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "You've changed." "I had to," he replied gently. "So, what now?" That question opened up a maze with no clear answer. But at least Miranda was here, and that, though small, was a beginning. In the days that followed, Miranda quietly observed the new rhythm of the estate. She saw the growing confidence in Hannah, a young mother now juggling childcare and leading a community project. She witnessed how Ruth calmly held the balance between people who once had no place in each other's lives, and made a home not defined by blood. And each time she stepped into the sunroom where Amelia was learning new sounds with Noah, organizing picture cards with Elijah, or simply holding Micah's hand, Miranda came to understand more clearly her daughter had found a world she once didn't dare believe could exist. The bond between Amelia and those 3 boys. It's unbelievable. Miranda Wells whispered to Ethan one late afternoon as they stood together on the balcony, overlooking the garden. "This patchwork family you've created here," she added with a faint smile. "It's unlike anything we ever imagined, and yet, somehow, it feels right." Ethan Wells nodded, his eyes fixed on the children playing in the soft afternoon light. "I've realized," he said, "that sometimes the best families aren't the ones we build by design. They're the ones we stumble upon by chance." The days following Miranda's return carried a flood of conflicting emotions, as if shattered pieces of a puzzle were slowly being placed back together. What could have become a tug-of-war for Amelia's affection instead unfolded into the beginnings of something unexpected, a fragile alliance between 2 women, each bearing her own scars. One afternoon, while sitting together on a stone bench in the garden watching the children play. Miranda suddenly spoke to Hannah Parker. I left because I couldn't face the fear, the pain our daughter was going through. So, what kind of mother does that make me? Hannah looked at her without judgment, only thoughtfulness. Being a parent, she replied gently, is something that breaks each of us in different ways. I've made plenty of mistakes, too. That one honest admission melted the invisible wall between them. Between a mother who had left her child out of fear and another who had no solid support for years there, now existed the purest kind of connection-love for their children. The contrast between Miranda's polished European elegance and Hannah's grounded resilience surprisingly laid a solid foundation. They both wanted the same thing to mend the pieces life had shattered for their children. Miranda decided to rent a small home near the Wells estate, allowing her to be present in Amelia's life while maintaining a healthy distance from Ethan. Both understood their marriage could not be salvaged, but they could build something new: companionship without obligation, with their daughter as the priority. I'm thinking about staying in Boston long term, Miranda said to Ethan during a follow-up meeting with Dr. Helena Brooks. I've missed too much already. Ethan simply nodded, surprised to realize he no longer felt any bitterness. Amelia will love that, and so will the rest of us. Meanwhile, Hannah truly flourished in her new role. Years of hardship had shaped her into a quick problem solver with remarkable sensitivity to what a community truly needed. Within weeks, Wells Tech's image in Brookline transformed from that of a distant tech corporation to a genuine partner of the forgotten neighborhoods. You really have a gift for this, Ethan said after reviewing her proposal for a tech outreach program for underprivileged children. Poverty taught me to see what people actually need, Hannah replied, not what they're told they should have, but what helps them live with dignity. At the center of it all, Ruth remained the steadfast anchor, never flashy, never interfering too deeply. She quietly bridged the gap between worlds that once seemed incompatible. With her lifetime of managing a sprawling family household, she preserved old values while embracing inevitable change. The children adapted easily, as if the invisible walls between the main house and the guest house had never existed. Noah, Elijah, and Micah treated the garden as their own playground. When they were with Amelia, it felt as though they had always lived there. When they returned home with their mother, they remained the same polite, cheerful boys as ever. Miranda's presence was welcomed by the children with the natural openness only kids possess: no judgment, no questions, just another friend to play with, to learn from, to share the communication system they had helped build. Amelia continued to make steady progress. Each week she added new words and gestures. Elijah's communication board had grown to include dozens of new concepts enabling her to express emotions, choose meals, even tell short, funny stories. One evening, the whole extended family gathered for dinner, a new tradition that had taken root. Amelia carefully placed word cards on the table. One by one, everyone fell silent, waiting for her to finish. Finally, the message appeared clearly: Happy Family is here. In that moment, more than one pair of eyes brimmed with tears. Ruth leaned down and held Amelia's hand. That's right, sweetheart, she said softly. Family is right here. That night, Ethan stood by the window in his study, looking toward the guest house where Hannah was likely helping the boys with their homework. In the garden apartment nearby, Miranda was probably brewing her evening tea. In the nursery, Ruth was reading Amelia a bedtime story. For so long, family had been a boxed-in concept for Ethan defined by bloodlines, status, and proud lineage. The legacy of the Wells name, the foundation of his success. Now, the word meant something entirely different. Messy, complicated, but full of warmth, and more real than anything he had ever known. The concept of family had once been crystal clear to Ethan Wells, a prestigious bloodline, a pristine pedigree, a flawless public image. It was something he had absorbed from his mother, Eleanor Wells, without question. Now, family was a messy, intricate painting, more radiant than anything he had ever imagined. Strangers who had found each other through hardship, whose differences didn't pull them apart, but instead completed one another. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Gregory, his longtime driver and trusted aide, stepped inside. "Sir, I thought you should know tonight. Miss Amelia asked to have her mother with her before bed." Ethan frowned. Her mother. "You mean both?" Gregory smiled gently. She pointed at her board, first Miranda, then Hannah. "It seems she's quite clear that both women matter." Ethan chuckled softly. A strange yet beautiful image formed in his mind, his refined ex-wife from London, seated beside the resilient single mother from Brookline, both saying good night to a little girl who couldn't speak, yet had taught all of them what love beyond social norms truly meant. "Thank you, Gregory," he said quietly, "for everything." The next morning, before he could finish his first sip of coffee, Ethan received an email that made him freeze. Subject: breakthrough treatment opportunity for Amelia Wells. From Dr. Hinrich Vogel, Director, Zurich Institute of Neurological Research. Ethan stared at the screen. 6 months ago, he would have opened an email like this without hesitation, grasping at any glimmer of hope. But now, he hesitated. The email was professionally written, meticulous. Dr. Vogel stated that he had come across Amelia's case through medical symposiums. A new neurological surgery combining advanced neural stimulation and cell regeneration therapy had shown impressive results. 78% of pediatric patients had regained speech. "We believe Amelia is an ideal candidate." The letter read. Ethan read it 3 times before calling Dr. Helena Brooks. "I'm familiar with Vogel's work," she confirmed after reviewing the documents. "Theoretically, it's promising, but it's still experimental. And you should know the risks aren't insignificant." "How serious?" he asked, genuinely concerned for the first time about this aspect. "Brain surgery always comes with risks," she said frankly, "especially with new techniques. Possible complications include emotional dysregulation, even personality changes." That evening, Ethan sat with Miranda in his study. They had grown used to such conversations, sharing updates on Amelia, discussing parenting perspectives. He handed her the email. "Surgery." Miranda's face paled. "In Switzerland, it sounds promising," Ethan replied, but his voice lacked the old urgency. "It might help her speak again." Miranda studied him. 6 months ago, you would have put her on the next flight." "What's changed?" Ethan paused. "Everything." He exhaled. "I'm not even sure the goal is for her to speak normally anymore. She's already communicating in her own way. And if she spoke like other kids, would that make her happier?" Miranda didn't answer. She understood even he didn't know the answer. They decided to call a family meeting. Ruth, Hannah, Dr. Helena, and Amelia's therapy team were all invited. The discussion lasted all evening. Opinions were split. The medical experts leaned toward taking the chance this was a rare opportunity. Ruth gently countered. "She's making progress with what we're doing. Why gamble with that?" Then, unexpectedly, a small voice spoke from the doorway. It was Noah, the 9-year-old boy wiser than his years. "Are you trying to make Amelia talk like everyone else?" he asked. Ethan paused, then nodded. A doctor said he might help her speak like a typical child. Noah thought deeply, brows furrowed. But what if she doesn't want to talk like everyone else? What if she likes how she talks now? The room fell silent. That simple question left all the adults speechless. "We haven't asked her," Miranda whispered. The very next day, the family sat together with Amelia. She was carefully guided through the communication board. There was a surgery that might help her talk like other children. But there were risks. Did she want to try? Amelia didn't rush. She looked at each person in the room, then turned to Micah, as she always did when she needed emotional grounding. The youngest boy gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Then Amelia began tapping on the cymbals. Worried, doctor, cut head, a long pause, friend, help, me, talk, already. The answer was clear as daylight. Not because she didn't want to change, but because she knew. She already had a voice, one that existed because of the friends the world once considered nobodies. Noah's question brought a hush over the entire room. "But what if she doesn't want to talk like everyone else?" the boy asked with a seriousness rare for a 9-year-old. "What if she likes the way she communicates now?" "We don't even know what she wants," Miranda Wells whispered. Then she looked up at Ethan. "Have we ever asked her?" No one answered because they all knew the truth. They hadn't. Immediately after, using the communication system that the whole group had helped develop over the past few months, Amelia was gently and clearly told a doctor from Zurich believed he could help her speak like other children through surgery. But there would be risks. She was asked directly. "Do you want to try?" Amelia was quiet. She looked at each person, one by one. Then her gaze landed on Micah, the youngest of the 3 boys, sitting quietly in the corner of the room. Without a word, Micah walked over and held her hand, just as he always did. That simple gesture seemed to calm her. Slowly and deliberately, Amelia tapped on her board. Scared, doctor, cut head, but friend, help, me, talk, already. Ethan was speechless, not just because of the clarity of his daughter's choice, but because it showed something even deeper. She understood everything. She understood the choice, the risk, and the value of the connection she had. She didn't choose medicine, she chose humanity. She chose connection and love. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Ethan opened his laptop and began typing a reply to Dr. Henrik Vogel. His tone was polite but firm. "My daughter's living an extraordinary life, surrounded by people who understand and love her exactly as she is. We must respectfully decline your offer." 3 days later, a formal letter arrived by International Express Courier. The sender, Zurich Institute of Neurological Research. The content, an invitation for the family to attend a private consultation with their surgical team at an ongoing medical conference in Boston. During their weekly morning coffee, Ethan handed the letter to Miranda. "They're persistent," she said, examining the embossed heading and blue signature. "A good trait for a surgeon. They believe in their method," Ethan said, sipping his coffee, "just like I used to believe in every cutting-edge treatment that ever existed." The meeting was scheduled in a private conference room at Massachusetts General Hospital. Ethan, Miranda, Dr. Helena Brooks, and Ruth all attended. Ethan insisted that Ruth be present because she understood Amelia in a way no one else could. The Swiss team included 3 specialists. Leading them was Dr. Hinrich Vogel, a tall man with neatly parted silver hair and sharp, perceptive eyes. The 2 younger colleagues had impressive credentials and immaculate professional demeanor. Mr. and Mrs. Wells, thank you for your time, Dr. Vogel began in crisp, British-accented English. We've reviewed Amelia's full medical file, and we are more certain than ever she is an ideal candidate for our method. The presentation began. Brain scans, neural signal charts, and success rates were displayed on a large screen. It was all highly convincing and professionally delivered. Ethan listened carefully. He asked pointed questions about procedure steps, recovery times, success metrics, and complication rates. Our technique targets stimulation of language centers in the brain. Dr. Vogel explained, gesturing to a 3D brain model, combined with regenerative therapy. Early results are promising. What about the risks? Ruth interjected, her eyes locked on the doctor. Doctor. Vogel smiled, a bit tightly. All surgical interventions come with risk, but ours is minimally invasive. The benefits far outweigh them. Specifically, Ethan cut in. One of the younger doctors answered, there is a minor risk of infection, as with any surgery, but more notably, about 4% may experience impacts to other brain functions. Less than 2% might see personality shifts or emotional dysregulation. The room fell silent. Personality changes, Miranda echoed, barely believing what she'd heard. Very rare, Dr. Vogel reassured, and worth weighing against the potential for normal language development. Think about her future school, work, independence. Ethan stood, walking over to the window overlooking the hospital garden. Outside, patients were enjoying the spring sun, some in wheelchairs, others with therapy dogs. Dr. Vogel, he said, turning around, his voice gentle but resolute. We appreciate your time and effort, but I must decline. The doctor frowned. Mr. Wells, perhaps you don't fully understand the potential of this intervention. Oh, I do, Ethan replied. 6 months ago, I'd have signed anything for my daughter to be normal, but not anymore. He glanced at Miranda, then at Ruth. Both nodded in quiet support. My daughter Amelia is communicating, not in the way society expects, but in her own way. She has friends, a voice, and a family. That's enough. Doctor. Brooks smiled softly. Ruth placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Medicine should serve people, Ethan concluded, not turn them into replicas of someone else's definition of normal. I've spent too long learning that lesson. As they left the hospital, Ruth looped her arm through Ethan's like a true family matriarch. Eleanor would never have made that decision. She murmured, No, Ethan agreed. She wouldn't have. But I have. Personality changes. Miranda Wells repeated each word slowly, carefully, extremely rare. Dr. Hinrich Vogel reassured, and should be weighed against the tremendous benefits restoring the ability to speak like a typical child. Just imagine how Amelia's life could change college, a career, independence. Ethan Wells glanced at Ruth, who had remained silent throughout the conversation. Her face was calm, but her eyes held clear doubt. 6 months ago. These would have been the words he longed to hear. The possibility of normal for his daughter would have drowned out all fears. Mr. Wells, Dr. Vogel continued, sensing hesitation. This might be her only chance. Our research budget is limited, and we can only accept a certain number of candidates. If your family declines, we must move on to the next eligible patient. Ethan suddenly stood. He walked to the window, looking down at the hospital garden below where patients in wheelchairs basked in the spring sun. Guided by loved ones and therapy dogs, he finally turned back, his voice low but firm. Dr. Vogel, thank you to you and your team for coming all this way, but I must decline. The Swiss doctor furrowed his brow. Mr. Wells, perhaps you don't fully understand the opportunity being presented. No, Ethan replied, his voice soft but steady. I understand very well. He stepped back toward the table, lifted his chin slightly, and spoke with clarity. 6 months ago, I would have signed any paper you put in front of me. I would have paid any amount if it meant my daughter could be normal. But now, Amelia has a remarkable support system. She's communicating in her own way, through gestures, picture boards, and a language co-created with her friends. More importantly, she's happy. But she could live a normal life, Dr. Vogel insisted. Who gets to define what normal is? Ethan asked gently, without anger. My daughter's surrounded by unconditional love. She has real friendships, and she's growing in a way that's right for her. To me, that's already an extraordinary life. Dr. Helena Brooks nodded in agreement. Ruth reached out, gently taking Ethan's hand. Miranda's eyes shimmered not from regret, but from deep emotion. Medicine should serve people as they are, Ethan continued, not pressure them into fitting someone else's ideal mold. It's taken me a long time to learn that lesson, and it came at a cost. As the group gathered their things to leave, Dr. Vogel made one last attempt. You're making an emotional decision, not a rational one. Ethan smiled slightly. Yes, he said calmly. And that is the greatest progress I've made as a father. Outside the hospital, the spring breeze met their faces. Ruth gently looped her arm through Ethan's as they slowly made their way to the waiting car. Eleanor Wells's son wouldn't have made that decision. She murmured, No. Ethan admitted he wouldn't have. But I have changed. Refusing the treatment wasn't just a medical decision, it was a rejection of old values legacy, perfection, conformity. The things he once inherited from his mother had no place in his heart anymore. Instead, he had found something far more precious, the wisdom to accept his daughter exactly as she was, and the courage to protect that truth in a world obsessed with sameness. 1 year later, the Wells estate looked nothing like it once did. The cold, sterile treatment wing had been transformed into a vibrant, learning environment. The Wells Communication Academy, a school for children with unique communication needs. Medical equipment had been replaced by colorful learning corners, interactive boards, and custom tools developed by the students themselves. The garden was redesigned with inclusive outdoor play zones, sensory paths, and cozy lounges for both children and parents. In the grand foyer, the first year-end celebration was about to begin. The audience was packed wealthy and working-class families sitting side by side, drawn together by their shared love for children who spoke in unique, powerful ways. Ethan Wells stood quietly at the back of the hall, eyes glimmering with a quiet kind of pride. Over the past year, He had almost fully stepped back from the leadership of his tech empire, entrusting it to capable colleagues so he could focus entirely on the Wells Communication Academy, a school he never could have imagined existing in his own family estate. A man who once measured success in numbers and returns now found value in the smallest of victories, a child uttering their first word, or a glance that said, "I see you," not with eyes, but with the heart. Hannah Parker, walking with steady strides and confident eyes, moved among the crowd of parents and volunteers. As director of the Wells Communication Fund, she had helped transform the spontaneous methods born from her 3 sons into widely adopted communication tools. Her work hadn't only transformed her own family's future, it had ignited hope for dozens of others. Ruth, ever steady, now ran the school's residential program, welcoming children and families without the means to afford care. Decades of managing the Wells estate had laid the foundation for her to build something far more meaningful, a space full of warmth, safety, and belonging. Miranda Wells now split her time between London and Boston, maintaining her career while stepping fully into her role as a mother. The partnership she had rebuilt with Ethan had become a quiet model for others, a reminder that divorce didn't have to mean division. As the lights dimmed, Gregory, once the family chauffeur, now the school's transportation coordinator, gently ushered the final guests to their seats. The room fell into a hush, a silence made not of tension, but of sacred anticipation. Then the stage lights rose. Amelia, now 8 years old, stepped forward with Noah, Lucas, and Micah. She stood tall, her eyes bright, her posture confident, an entirely different child from the silent, withdrawn girl she had once been. Noah, now 10, remained her most loyal companion, always knowing when to speak and when to simply be there. Lucas, 8, continued to invent new visual tools for communication, and Micah, just 6, still held Amelia's hand, an unbroken, miraculous connection that had never faded. Together, the children told their story, a story of friendship that defied every barrier. They used sign language, picture boards, speech devices, and expressive gestures. And when it came time for Amelia to speak, the entire auditorium held its breath. She inhaled, steadying herself, and then said slowly, haltingly, but clearly, "Thank you. Noah, Lucas, Micah, you gave me my voice." A simple sentence, yet each word cut through every wall. The hall trembled in silence, then erupted applause, tears, joy, not for perfection, but for courage, not for eloquence, but for truth. Ruth clasped her hands tightly, her eyes glistening with joy. Hannah beamed, like a mother watching her child graduate from something deeper than school, from silence itself. Miranda couldn't hold back her tears. And Ethan, a man who once believed wealth and power could heal all things, now understood life's true value lay not in spreadsheets or legacies, but in a single glance filled with meaning, a reclaimed voice, and an embrace that said, "You are loved." After the ceremony, as people mingled and laughed in the back garden, Ethan stood with Ruth, watching the children play among the colorful playground equipment where once his mother's prized rose garden had been. "Eleanor would be furious," he said with a half-smile. "Perhaps." Ruth nodded. "Or perhaps she might have learned something from the man you've become." "No." He shook his head. "She never changed. But you did," she said, her voice warm and knowing. The journey from that fateful day in the park to this moment had not only changed one man, it had rewritten what a family could mean for a household. for a community, perhaps even for a generation. Where Ethan Wells once saw flaws in his daughter, he now saw gifts. Where he once valued legacy and image, he now cherished connection and truth. That evening, everyone gathered on the mansion's front steps for the school's first-ever family photo. Ethan, Miranda, Hannah, the three boys, Ruth, Gregory, and many more who had become part of this growing circle stood side by side. Everyone say, "Family," the photographer called out, and from every corner, voices rose, some spoken aloud, some signed, some from devices, some through joyful sounds uniquely their own, but all carried the same meaning. Family, connection, belonging, and, at the heart of it all, Amelia's voice, hard-won, imperfect, and radiant, joined the chorus of unconditional love. Sometimes, the people we overlook are the very ones who hold the answers our hearts have been searching for. In a world obsessed with perfection, Amelia's story reminds us that true healing doesn't come from prestige or titles, but from presence, patience, and love that sees beyond the surface. Ethan Wells was a man who had everything, yet almost lost the one thing that truly mattered. It took 3 brave, brilliant children from the margins of society to teach him and all of us that connection is more powerful than conformity. That family isn't defined by blood or status, but by who shows up and loves without condition. And maybe the greatest miracle wasn't that Amelia found her voice, but that everyone around her finally learned how to listen. Let this story be a gentle but firm reminder. Prejudice doesn't protect us. It isolates us. Empathy doesn't cost a thing, but it can change everything. If this story touched you, made you feel, made you think, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. It helps us bring more heartwarming, meaningful stories to life and share them with those who need them most. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss what's coming next. Because sometimes the next story might just be yours. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video.